In the shadows of the ancient forest, a tiny bear cub's desperate cries echoed through the darkness, but what stalked him in the gathering dusk would test not just as will to survive, but the very bonds of nature itself. The approaching storm painted the sky in ominous shades of charcoal, casting long shadows to the towering pines that had stood sentinel. For centuries, Scout, barely 4 months old, trembled beneath a gnarled oak tree. His chocolate-brown fur was matted from the first drops of rain, and his small frame shook with each rumble of thunder. Just hours ago, he had been safely tucked against his mother's warm side, learning to forage for berries in their familiar valley. Now separated by a sudden mudslide, he found himself in unknown territory where every rustle of leaves and crack of branches sent shivers down his spine. The wind picked up, carrying unfamiliar scents that made his nose twitch anxiously. His mother had taught him about danger, about the sharp sense of predators and the telling sounds of threats, but in his panic, every sensation overwhelmed his senses. Scout let out another whimper, hoping his mother would hear him above the growing storm, but his cries were swallowed by a deafening crack of thunder. Rain began to fall in earnest, now drumming against the canopy above. Scout pressed himself closer to the oak's rough bark, his small claws digging into the earth. He remembered his mother's lessons: stay still, stay quiet, find shelter. But fear and loneliness clouded his mind, making it hard to think clearly. His stomach growled, reminding him that their foraging had been interrupted before he'd eaten his fillet. Flash of lightning illuminated the forest, casting everything in stark white. For a brief moment, Scout's heart nearly stopped as he caught glimpses of shapes moving through the underbrush, shapes that shouldn't be there, shapes that move with purpose. In that instant of clarity, his nose picked up a scent that made his fur stand on end. It was a smell his mother had warned him about, one that meant death to small, helpless creatures like himself, wolves, the young cubs. Breathing quickened, his chest heaving with each shallow breath. He could smell them more clearly now, not just one, but many. The rain might have mashed their approach, but now their scent was unmistakable. Scout's instinct screamed at him to run, but his mother's voice echoed in his memory. Sometimes stillness is safer than flight. Through the curtain of rain, yellow eyes began to appear, floating like phantom lights in the growing darkness. They moved with practiced precision, spreading out in a pattern that Scout was too young to recognize as a hunting formation. Low growls, barely audible above the storm, sent tremors through his small body. The lead wolf stepped into a patch of fading light. He was massive, wither the color of storm clouds, and a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw. Behind him, more wolves emerged in the shadows, their first liquid rain, their eyes fixed on the trembling cub. Scout could count 6 of them, no 7, their muscle forms moving like liquid shadow through the underbrush. A whimper escaped Scout's throat before he could stop it. The lead wolf's ears twitched at the sound, and his scarred muzzle pulled back to reveal yellowed fangs. Scout knew he should run, but his legs felt frozen, rooted to the spot by terror. The wolf pack was closing in, their circle tightening with each passing second. The scarred wolf, the alpha, took another step forward, and Scout could see his own reflection in those merciless yellow eyes. This was nothing like the playful hunting games his mother had taught him. This was real, primal, and deadly. Another crack of thunder shipped the forest, and Scout finally found the strength to move. He bolted his small legs, carrying him as fast as they could through the rain-soaked undergrowth. Behind him, he heard the wolves break into pursuit, their paws pounding against the earth in a rhythm that matched his racing heart. Scout crashed through ferns and ducked under fallen logs, trying to remember everything his mother had taught him about escape routes. But he was so young, so inexperienced. His paw caught on an exposed route, sending him tumbling down a small embankment. He rolled to a stop in a clearing, the breath knocked from his lungs as he struggled to his feet. The wolves appeared at the top of the embankment, their form silhouetted against the stormy sky, Scout backed away. His small frame, trembling as a pack, began to descend toward him. The Alpha's eyes gleamed with hungry anticipation. And Scout knew with terrible certainty that this clearing might be the last thing he ever saw. He let out one final desperate cry, a sound that carried all his fear, all his longing for his mother. All his will to live. The cry echoed through the forest, carried by the wind and rain. The wolves paused in their advance, ears pricked forward at something Scout couldn't yet sense. There was a shift in the air, a new tension that made even the Alpha's scarred face turn slightly. Something was coming, something big enough to give even a wolf pack pause. Through the sheets of rain, a deep rumbling growl rolled across the clearing like distant thunder, but this was no storm sound. This was something else entirely. The Wole's formation wavered, their confidence flickering like shadows in the wind. Scout's nose caught a new scent on the air, one that spoke of power and wildness, and something else, something that would change everything. A massive shape emerged from the tree, moving with a deliberate grace that bellied its enormous size. Thunder, a battle-scarred grizzly bear whose mere presence commanded respect throughout these mountains, stood like a living wall between Scout and the wolf pack. His dark fur, streaked with silver around his muzzle, glistened in the rain as he assessed the situation with eyes that held centuries of wild wisdom. The Alpha wolf Shadow took a half step back, his scarred face twisting in a snarl of frustrated calculation. His pack spread out instinctively, their sleek forms moving like smoke through the rain as they tried to maintain their advantage. But Thunder's arrival had changed the dynamics of their hunt dramatically. Scout, still trembling from his fall, watched in awe as the giant grizzly planted his huge paws firmly in the mud. Thunder's muscles rippled beneath his wet fur as he rose to his full height, towering over the wolves like an ancient guardian spirit. The young cub had never seen anything so magnificent or terrifying. Shadow's yellow eyes narrowed as he studied the grizzly. The Alpha was no stranger to confrontation, but this was different. The old bear scars told stories of battles, of territory defended, of years spent mastering the harsh laws of the wilderness. Still, Shadow had his pack to consider, and their hunger drove them forward despite their obvious weariness. Thunder dro back to all fours, his movements deliberately slow, his eyes dark pools of intelligence never left Shadow's face. The grizzly had seen countless wolf packs in his years roaming these mountains, but something about this one, about their desperation, made his fur bristle with unease. Behind him he could hear the cub's rapid breathing, smell the fear rolling off him in waves. The rain intensified, drumming against the forest canopy like nature's own war drums. A flash of lightning illuminated the clearing, casting harsh shadows that made the wolves appear more numerous than they were. Shadow's pack began to circle wider, testing the boundaries of Thunder's defense. Two younger wolves, their gray fur darker with rain, crept forward on Thunder left flank. The old grizzly responded with a roar that shook leaves from the nearby trees. The sound reverberated through the clearing, a primal challenge that spoke of power accumulated through countless seasons. The younger wolves immediately backed away, their tails lowering slightly. Even Shadow's aggressive stance falter for a moment. Scout, watching from behind Thunder's massive form, felt something shift inside him. The paralyzing fear began to give way to a glimmer of hope. He had heard stories from his mother about the great bears of the mountain, but seeing one in person, seeing one stand against a whole pack of wolves, it was like watching a legend come to life. Thunder took a deliberate step forward, his huge paw leaving a deep impression in the mud. His message was clear. The cub was under his protection now. Shadow's response was immediate, a series of short, sharp BS that sent his pack into motion. They began to move in a tightening spiral, a deadly dance they had performed countless times before, but Thunder was no ordinary prey, as two wolves darted in from opposite sides. The grizzly moved with surprising speed for his size. His right paw swept out in a devastating arc, catching one wolf mid-lunge and sending it tumbling through the underbrush. The other wolf barely managed to dodge a powerful bite that would have ended the fight then, and their shadow watched these exchanges, carefully reading the old bear's movements. Looking for any sign of weakness, the alpha had not survived this. Long by being reckless, Thunder's defense of the cub was unexpected. Bears were typically solitary creatures, caring only for their own offspring. This anomaly made Shadow hesitate, his tactical mind working through the implications. Scout found himself drawn to Thunder's unwavering strength. Despite the chaos of the confrontation, the old bear moved with a certainty that seemed to calm the very air around him. When another wolf ventured too close, Thunder's warning growl rumbled to the clearing like distant avalanche. The rain began to ease slightly, though Thunder still rolled across the sky in waves. Shadow's pack regrouped, their formations tighter now. More cautious, they had lost their initial advantage of surprise, and the price of victory was climbing higher. With each passing moment, the alpha's scarred face showed the calculation taking place behind those predatory eyes. Thunder used this moment of relative calm to glance briefly at Scout. Their eyes met, and in that instant something profound passed between them, a wordless understanding that transcended the natural order. The old bear saw in Scout's eyes the same innocence he had once protected in his own cubs. Seasons ago, the cub saw in Thunder's gaze a strength that went beyond mere physical power. Shadow barked again, but this time the sound carried a different note. Two of his wolves had begun to limp from their encounters with Thunder, and the rest showed signs of fatigue from the prolonged standoff. The alpha knew that every confrontation had its price, and this one was becoming too costly, yet the pack's hunger was a powerful motivator. As of reading this tension in his adversaries, Thunder rose once again to his full height. Rain ran in rivulets through his fur as he stood like a mountain, made flesh his presence, filling the clearing with an almost palpable force. His message needed no translation to reach the cub. They would have to go through him. The wolves began to back away, maintaining their formation, but gradually increasing the distance between themselves and the massive grizzly. Shadow was the last to retreat, his scarred face locked in a final intense there with Thunder. Both ancient predators knew this wasn't over. It was merely a pause, and a drama that had yet to reach its conclusion. As the wolf pack melted back into the shadows of the forest, Scout released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Thunder remained standing for several long moments, his keen senses tracking the wolves' retreat through the rain-soaked wilderness. Only when he was certain they were truly gone did he lower himself back to all fours and turn his full attention to the trembling cub behind him. Thunder's massive head lowered to Scout's level, his dark eyes studying the trembling cub with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his fearsome appearance. Scout remained frozen, caught between instinctive fear of this enormous predator and the profound gratitude for his rescue. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, creating a peaceful backdrop to this unlikely encounter. The old grizzly's breath ruffled Scout's wet fur as he sniffed, carefully memorizing the cub scent. There was something about this small, defenseless creature that stirred ancient memories in Thunder's mind. Memories of his own cubs from seasons past, of the fierce protective instinct that had once defined his life. Those cubs were grown, now roaming their own territories far from these familiar mountains. Scout finally found the courage to move, taking a tentative step toward his massive protector. Thunder remained perfectly still, allowing the cub to approach at his own pace. When Scout's small nose touched Thunder's battle-scarred muzzle, the old bear rumbled softly, not the earth shaking roar from earlier, but a gentle sound meant to reassure. The moment was shattered by a distant howl. Shadows Packed regrouping in the darkness, Thunder's head snapped up his ears. Swiveling to track the sound, the wolves hadn't gone far, just far enough to regroup and reconsider their strategy. Scout pressed himself against Thunder's front leg, his small body trembling, and knew with the haunting sound. Thunder knew they couldn't stay in the clearing. Shadow's pack would return, perhaps with reinforcements, and the next confrontation might not end so favorably. The old bear gently nudged Scout with his nose, urging him toward the opposite tree. The cub hesitated, his instincts wearing with his trust in this unexpected guardian. Another, how close to this time, made the decision for them. Scout stumbled forward, his tired legs barely supporting him after his ordeal. Thunder moved alongside him, his massive body shielding the cub from the direction of the wolves' calls. Together, they made their way into the forest. Thunder deliberately choosing a path that would support Scout's smaller frame. As they traveled, Thunder kept all his senses alert. His ears caught every snap of twig and rustle of leaf, while his nose sorted to the complex tapestry of forest. Since the wolves were following, but maintaining their distance for now, the old bear recognized their strategy. They were waiting for either him or the cub to make a mistake, to show any sign of weakness. Scout struggled to keep pace, his short legs trembling with exhaustion. Thunder noticed the cub's fatigue and slowed his own pace, though his instincts urged him to put more distance between them and their pursuers. When Scout stumbled over a fallen branch, Thunder surprised himself by reaching out with one massive paw to steady to Tiny Bear. The gestures seemed to break down the last barriers between them. Scout pressed closer to Thunder's side, finding comfort in the warmth radiating from the massive grizzly. Thunder felt a familiar stirring in his chest, the same feeling he had when his own cubs had sought his protection during storms or danger. They paused briefly by a small stream where Thunder watched the Scout lapped eagerly at the clear water. The old bear kept his guard up, using the moment to survey their surroundings. The forest was quieter than it should have been, other creatures sensing the presence of both wolf pack and bear. Only the gentle sound of running water and Scout's drinking broke the silence. Thunder's vigilance was rewarded when he caught movement in his peripheral vision, a gray shadow slipping between trees. The wolves were closer than he thought. Without making any sudden movements that might startle Scout, Thunder positioned himself between the cub and the potential threat, his muscles tense beneath his thick fur, ready for action. Scout, sensing the change in his protector's demeanor, finished drinking and pressed close to Thunder's side. Once again, the old bear was impressed by the cub's developing instincts. He was learning to read the subtle signals that could mean the difference between life and death. In the wilderness, a low growl rumbled from the underbrush, followed by another from a different direction. Shadow was trying to surround them again, using the terrain to his advantage. Thunder knew they had to move, but he also knew that Scout's exhaustion was becoming dangerous. The cub needed rest, but rest would make them vulnerable. Making a quick decision, Thunder gently gripped Scout by the scruff of his neck, just as he had done with his own cubs long ago. The cub went limp instinctively, allowing Thunder to lift him clear the ground with Scout secure. Thunder could move faster, his powerful legs carrying them swiftly through the forest. The wolves burst from cover behind him, their pursuit now open and aggressive. Thunder could hear them crashing through the undergrowth, their panting breaths carrying clearly in the night air, but burdened as he was with Scout. The old bear still moved with surprise speed and agility, ducking under low branches and weaving between trees with practiced ease. Scout remained perfectly still in Thunder's grasp, seeming to understand the gravity of their situation. The cub's trust in his protector had become absolute, a bond forged in danger and strengthened by Thunder's unwavering guardianship. As they fled through the darkened forest, that bond deepened with each stride. Thunder led their pursuers on a winding path, using his intimate knowledge of the territory to gradually gain ground. He knew of a place, a rocky outcropping, where he could protect Scout more easily, where the wolves would be forced to attack from limited directions. If they could reach it before exhaustion took its toll, they might have a chance to rest and recover the house behind them. Grew more distant as Thunder's strategy began to work. The old bear's endurance, built over years of roaming these mountains, was proving great than the wolves' desperate hunger. Still, he knew better than to underestimate Shadow's determination. The alpha would not give up easily, not when his pack's survival might depend on this hunt. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Thunder finally allowed himself to slow. The rocky sanctuary he sought was close now, and the wolves' calls had faded to distant echoes. Carefully, he set Scout down in a small hollow between two fallen logs. The cub immediately pressed against Thunder's leg, his small body trembling. With a mixture of exhaustion and lingering fear, Thunder stood guard as Scout's breathing gradually steadied. The old bear's own chest heaved from the exertion, but his eyes remained sharp as they scanned the shadows around them. They had won this round, but both bear and cub knew that their trial was far from over. As the forest began to wake around them, Thunder silently knolled the depth of his commitment to the small orphan cub, a commitment that would soon be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the forest canopy, casting dappled shadows on Thunder and Scout as they began their journey anew. The rocky outcropping had provided them shelter through the remaining hours of darkness, but both bears knew they couldn't stay there forever. Scout's mother was somewhere in these vast woods, and Thunder had silently committed himself to reuniting the pair. Scouts stayed close to Thunder's massive form as they navigated the rough terrain. The cub's strength had returned somewhat after their brief rest, but the trauma of the previous night had left its mark. Every snapping twig or rustle of leaves made him jump. Pressing closer to his protector's side, Thunder responded to each of Scout's fears with patient reassurance, rumbling softly. Whenever the cub's anxiety peaked, their path led them through a series of increasingly challenging obstacles. A fast-moving stream swollen by the previous night's rain blocked their way. Forward, Thunder approached the water's edge, carefully testing the current. With one massive paw, Scout watched from behind his small face, a mixture of worry and trust. The old bear knew they had to cross. Backtracking would only lead them back toward Shadow's territory. Thunder gently nudged Scout with his nose, guiding him to a spot where the stream narrowed slightly. The cub looked up at him with uncertain eyes, but Thunder's calm demeanor seemed to give him courage. With infinite care, Thunder stepped into the rushing water, creating a living barrier against the current. Scout followed, staying close to Thunder's upstream side, where the water's force was broken by the larger bear's bulk. The cub's small legs worked furiously against the current, but Thunder's protective presence kept him from being swept away. Halfway across, Scout's paw slipped on a smooth stone before the current could grab him. Thunder's muzzle darted down, gently gripping the cub. Scruff in one fluid motion, he lifted Scout clear the water and carried him the rest of the way across. The cub shook himself vigorously on the far bank, sending water droplets flying in all directions. Thunder couldn't suppress a gentle rumble of amusement at the sight, a sound that surprised even him. It had been seasons since he felt this kind of connection, this responsibility for another life. Scout's presence was awakening parts of him he'd thought long dormant. Their moment of peace was interrupted by a distant howl. Shadow's pack had picked up their trail again. Thunder's head snapped up, his ears swiveling to track the sound. The wolves were still far off, but their persistence was concerning. The old bear knew they needed to keep moving, but he also recognized signs of fatigue in Scout's movements as they pressed on. Thunder began teaching Scout through example. When they passed berry bushes, he showed the cub which ones were safe to eat when they encountered fresh bee marks on trees. He demonstrated how to read the messages left by others of their kind. Scout absorbed everything with eager attention, His natural curiosity temporarily overcoming his fear, the terrain grew. Steeper as they climbed higher into the mountains, Thunder chose their path, carefully, always mindful of Scout. Smaller size and limited experience, when they encounter particularly difficult stretches, the old bear would wait patiently as Scout figured out how to navigate them, intervening only when absolutely necessary during one such moment. As Scout struggled to climb a steep rock face, Thunder caught a new scent on the wind his body tend. Immediately another bear was nearby. The scent was female, and there was something about it that made Scout's head snap up his nose, twitching rapidly before either could react. A series of sharp barks echoed through the trees below them. Shadow's pack had gained ground faster than Thunder had anticipated. The female bear scent disappeared as quickly as it had come, carried away by the shifting wind. Scout whimpered softly, torn between the familiar scent that might have been his mother and the approaching danger. Thunder made the decision for them with gentle urgency. He helped Scout scramble up the remaining rocks, then guided him toward a dense thicket of pines. The sounds grew closer, their excitement evident in their voices. They had probably caught the female bear scent as well, and the prospect of multiple potential targets had energized them as they moved through the pine thicket. Thunder deliberately brushed against the trees, leaving his scent to mask Scout's smaller trail. The old bear's mind worked, quickly formulating a plan. If the female bear was indeed Scout's mother, she would be searching these mountains for her cub, but right now the immediate threat had to be dealt with. Scout's breathing had become labored, his small body nearly spent from their constant movement. Thunder knew they couldn't keep this pace much longer. The cub needed real rest, and they needed a defensible position where they could make a stand if necessary. Through the trees, Thunder spotted what they needed: a rock formation that formed a natural cave. It wasn't ideal, as it could become a trap, but with Thunder Guard in the entrance, it would give Scout a chance to recover his strength. The old bear guided his young charge toward the opening, checking carefully for any current occupants before allowing Scout to enter. The cave was shallow but dry, with enough room for Scout to curl up safely while Thunder kept watch. The cub collapsed almost immediately, his small body trembling with exhaustion. Thunder positioned himself at the entrance, his massive form filling the opening. From this vantage point, he could see anyone approaching long before they reached the cave. As Scout's breathing slowly steadied into sleep, Thunder remained vigilant. The wolves' calls had grown more distant again, but he knew better than to relax his guard. Shadow was too skilled a hunter to give up easily, especially now that he might have caught the scent of Scout's mother. Thunder's thoughts turned to the female bear scent. If she was indeed Scout's mother, she would be desperate to find her cub. That desperation could make her careless, could lead her straight into Shadow's waiting pack. The old bear felt a new urgency building inside him. They needed to find her before the wolves did. For now, though, Scout needed rest. Thunder settled himself more firmly in the cave entrance, his body forming an impenetrable barrier between the sleeping cub and the dangers that lurked outside. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Thunder kept his vigil, his senses alert for any sign of either the wolves or the female bear. The next phase of their journey would test them all, but for this moment in this cave, Thunder could offer Scout the one thing the cub needed most: safety and a chance to regain his strength. The piece of their sanctuary was shattered by an urgent bark that echoed through the mountain air. Thunder's eyes snapped open, instantly alert. Scout stir behind him, letting out a frightened whimper. The old bear's worst fears were confirmed. Shadow's pack had returned, and this time they weren't alone. The barks and howls that filled the air spoke of a much larger hunting party. Thunder rose to his full height in the cave entrance, his massive frame casting a long shadow over Scout. Through the trees, he could see movement, not just the familiar shapes of Shadow's pack, but new wolves, therefore patterns different, their hunting calls Strange to his ears, Shadow had done exactly what Thunder had feared he'd. Called in reinforcements from neighboring packs, Scout pressed against Thunder's back leg, trembling, but no. Longer paralyzed by fear, the hours of rest had restored some of his strength. And Thunder's constant presence had given a courage he didn't know he possessed. The old bear rumbled softly, communicating without words that they would face this challenge. Together, the wolves emerged from the traying in waves. First Shadow's original pack, then others, until Thunder counted at least 15 sets. Of gleaming eyes fixed on their position, Shadow himself stood at the forefront, his scarred face twisted in a triumphant. Snarl the Alpha had played his hand well, gathering enough force to make even a grisly defense questionable, but Thunder had no intention of giving up his. Muscles bunched beneath his thick fur as he let out a roar that shook loose stones from the cave walls. The challenge in his voice was clear. He would defend Scout to his last breath. Several of the new wolves took involuntary steps backward, not having expected such ferocity from their intended prey. Shadow barked sharp commands, organizing his enhanced pack into a complex attack formation. Thunder recognized the strategy. They would try to draw him out to separate him from Scout. The old bear knew he couldn't let that happen. The cave that had been their sanctuary now felt like a trap, but at least it meant nothing to get the Scout without going through him first. The first wave of attacks came from multiple directions. 3 wolves darted in, trying to slip past Thunder's defenses. His massive paws swept through the air with devastating force, sending one wolf to stumbling down the rocky slope. The others retreated, but Thunder knew they were just testing his reactions, looking for weaknesses behind him. Scout had backed deeper into the cave, but his small eyes remained fixed on the battle. The cub watched as Thunder fought with a combination of raw power and calculated precision. Each movement designed to protect their position. There was something almost beautiful about the old bear's defense, a deadly dance of fur and fury. Shadow orchestrated the attacks with cruel intelligence, sending wolves and waves that forced Thunder to constantly shift his position. The old bear's breaths were coming harder now, each swipe of his paws carrying a little less force, but still he stood still. He fought, his determination undiminished, even as his strength began to fade. Then came a sound that changed everything, a deep, powerful roar from somewhere above the cave. Thunder's heartly lead as he recognized the voice. Scout's small body went rigid, his nose twitching frantically as he caught a familiar scent standing on a rocky outcrop above them was a massive female grizzly, her fur the same rich brown as Scout's, her eyes blazing with maternal fury. Hope Essergy through Thunder's tired body as Scout's mother Willow launched herself down the slope toward the wolves. Shadow's carefully orchestrated attack dissolved into chaos as the wolves scattered to avoid her charge. She landed beside Thunder, their massive shoulders nearly touching as they formed a wall of fur and muscle in front of the cave. Scout let out a joyful cry, trying to run to his mother, but Thunder gently blocked his path. The danger wasn't over. If anything, it had escalated. Shadow's pack quickly regrouped, and now the Alpha had a new calculation to make. 2 adult grizzlies presented a far more formidable challenge, but the pack's number still gave them an advantage. Willow's arrival had shifted the dynamic of the battle. She and Thunder moved with instinctive coordination, covering each other's blind spots, their combined defense nearly impenetrable. When wolves tried to circle behind them, one bear would turn a face of threat, while the other maintained the front line. Shadow, recognizing the changing odds, launched an all-out assault, the air filled with snarls and roars as the battle reached its climax. Thunder's experience and Willow's maternal rage proved to be a devastating combination. Wolves yelped in pain as massive paws found their marks, and gradually the attacks began to lose their coordination. The breaking point came when Thunder landed a particularly powerful blow on Shadow himself, sending The alpha sprawling across the rocky ground, the wolf struggled to his feet. Blood matting the fur around his scarred muzzle, he looked at his battered pack, at the two mighty bears standing there, ground, and finally at Scout's small face peering from between his protectors. Something seemed to pass between Shadow and Thunder in that moment, a recognition perhaps of the futility of this battle. The alpha threw back his head and let out a long, haunting howl, one by one his pack began to retreat, limping and bloody, but alive Shadow was the last I'll leave his yellow eyes meeting Thunder Eris one final time before he melted into the forest shadows as the last wolf disappeared. Willow turned to the cave entrance. Scout burst forward, unable to contain himself any longer, and buried himself in his mother's fur. Thunder watched the reunion with a mixture of joy and something else, a bittersweet acknowledgement that his role as protector was coming to an end. But Willow surprised him. Once she had thoroughly checked Scout for injuries, she turned into Thunder. Their eyes met, and in that moment a deep understanding passed between them. She stepped forward and gently pressed her nose to his battle scarred face, a gesture of profound gratitude and respect. Scout, still trembling with excitement, moved between them, pressing against both adult bears, as if unwilling to let either one out of his sight. Thunder felt a warm spread through his chest as he realized that, while his role as sole protector might be over, perhaps connection to the small family was just beginning. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, three bears made their way down from the battlefield, a mother, her cub, and an old warrior who had found a new purpose in life. The wolves were gone, but the bonds forged in those desperate hours would last far longer than any threat the forest could present. As the seasons turned, the tale of Thunder, Scout, and Willow became legend in the mountain wilderness, the story of the old grizzly who deaf nature's laws to protect a cub not his own spread through the forest, carried on. The wind and whispered in the rustle of leaves, but for the bears themselves the aftermath of their battle brought changes none of them had expected. Thunder, who had spent so many years in solitude, found himself drawn into the rhythms of family life. Willow, recognizing the depth of the bond between her cub and his protector, chose to establish her territory overlapping with Thunder's ancient domain. The arrangement was unusual. Adult bears typically avoided each other outside of mating season, but their shared experience had created something unique. Scout flourished under the guidance of both bears. From his mother, he learned the vital skills of survival, how to fish in mountain streams, how to dig for roots, and how to find the sweetest berry patches. But it was Thunder who taught him the deeper wisdom of the mountains, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to sense danger in the changing winds, and how to carry himself with the quiet confidence that had served the old bear so well. The three bears often gathered in Thunder's favorite meadow, where wild flowers painted the grass in brilliant colors and warm sunlight made even the old grizzly's battle scars seemed less fierce. Scout would practice his growing skills while Thunder and Willow watched their presence, ensuring no threat would dare approach. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, Thunder would demonstrate the art of honey, gathering his massive paws, delicately handling the combs, while Scout watched in fascination. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves danced on the breeze, they received an unexpected visitor. Aline Coyote appeared at the meadow's edge, her intelligent eyes taken in the unusual family gathering. It was sage known throughout the territory for her cunning and independence. She had watched the battle with the wolves from afar, and curiosity had finally drawn her to investigate these bears who defied the normal order of things. To everyone's surprise, Scout was the first to approach her. The cub, one so fearful, had grown confident under the protection of his two guardians. Sage's presence added a new dimension to Scout's education. She taught him about stealth and strategy, skills that complemented the raw power he was learning from Thunder and Willow. As winter approached, bringing with it the promise of hibernation, Thunder found himself facing a decision he never anticipated. The traditional solitude of a male bear's winter den called to him. But so did the small family he grown to love. Willow solve his dilemma by choosing a denning site near enough to Thunder's traditional cave that they could share the winter territory before retiring for their long sleep. The bears received one final visitor. Shadow, the wolf who had once led the attack against them, appeared alone on a rocky outcrop overlooking their territory. The alpha's coat had grayed further, and he moved with a slight stiffness of age, but his yellow eyes were as sharp as ever. He made no aggressive move, simply watching as Scout played under the protective gaze of both Thunder and Willow. The wolf's presence caused no panic this time. Something had Chong in the forest hierarchy since that desperate battle. Shadow's appearance seemed more like acknowledgement than threat or recognition that some bonds transcend ancient laws of predator and prey. After a long moment, the wolf turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving behind an unspoken peace. That winter, as snow blanketed the mountains in pristine white, the bears slept peacefully in their dens. Scout, now nearly half-grown, dreamed of spring adventures, while nestled against his mother's warm fur. Thunder, in his nearby cave, slept more contentedly than he had in years, his dreams full of the small family that had given his twilight years new purpose. When spring returned to the mountains, painting the slopes with fresh green and the bright colors of early flowers, the bears emerged to find their world renewed. Scout had grown significantly during the winter sleep, his frame beginning to show hints of the powerful adult he would become. His eyes, though, still held that same spark of curiosity that had first touched Thunder's heart. Their first family meal of the new season was interrupted by the sound of approaching bears. Thunder and Willow tense initially, but their worry turned to joy as they recognized the visitors, Thunder's own grown cubs from seasons past, drawn back to their father's territory by rumors of his unusual new family. The reunion was cautious at first, but Scout's innocent enthusiasm soon broke down any barriers. As Thunder watched his past and present families merge in that sunned, dappled meadow, he reflected on the strange paths life could take. He had begun this journey as a solitary defender, stepping between a helpless cub and certain death. Now he found himself at the center of something far richer, a blend of family bonds that defied the usual laws of their kind. Sage, the coyote, appeared occasionally, bringing news from distant parts of the forest and playing her own unique role in their unconventional family. Even Shadow's pack maintain a respectful distance there. Howls, now more like greetings than threats. The force itself seemed to have adapted to this new arrangement, creating a peaceful pocket where different species could coexist. Scout, now confident and strong, but still bearing the gentleness that characterized a spirit, often sat with Thunder on quiet evenings together. They would watch the sun set behind the mountains, sharing a companionable silence that spoke volumes about their bond. In these moments, Thunder knew that his greatest battle, the fight to protect a helpless CB, had led to his greatest victory, the discovery that family could be found in the most unexpected places. As darkness settled over the mountains, Thunder gazed at the stars appearing one by one above their peaceful domain. The old bear's heart was full, knowing that his legacy would live on, not just in his own cubs, but in Scout, the young bear, would taught him that sometimes the bravest thing one can do is open their heart to an unexpected love. The forest whispered their story to all who would listen, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and the powerful bonds that can form when nature's usual boundaries are transcended by love. And in the years that followed, other animals would speak of the old grizzly who proved that family is not always bound by blood, but by the choices we make and the love we share.